When we interviewed Andrew Wilkinson, he told us this.
The big thing that I started doing that was expensive and silly was flying private. That's one of the only rich people things that I think is actually worth the money.
Now, it may be because of the 2001 cinema classic Josie and the Pussycats, or maybe another piece of media that isn't only remembered by 30-year-old women. But when people think of flying private, they typically think of big, lavish, and expensive. Although when Nick Huber talked about his plane, listen to this.
It barely holds my family.
That made me think that flying private isn't exactly a one-size-fits-all, which is exactly what the private jet guy on Twitter told me. He's an expert, and he also goes by his real name, which is Preston Holland. In this episode, he's going to tell us about the different ways you can fly private, the different costs, and at what net worth and income it's right for who. We'll also analyze some of our past guests' flying habits, such as Brian Johnson and Scott Galloway. And yes, I'm currently at an airport, and as much as I would like to say that was for the bit, I actually just already had to be here. I'm going to interview Preston online, so let's go. All right, so there are two parallel spectrums to consider. The first is the type of ownership, and the second is the type and size of the plane. What makes sense for whom comes down to roughly three things: cost, lifestyle, and location. We'll start by talking about the types of ownership, beginning with the first option, which is not owning at all.
So chartering is the gateway drug to private aviation. It's the least committal way. It is as simple as calling somebody, I need to go from point A to point B and get me there in this time frame. And they say, here's the price. You say, sounds good. You sign up, go. On a per hour basis, it's the most expensive way to fly if you're just using per hour as your metric. So let's say a super mid aircraft like a Challenger 300 is going to be around $10,000 per hour to charter. Let's say, just using kind of target holistic numbers. If you owned it, your direct operating costs on that aircraft are going to be like $5,000 an hour, give or take some. But you also have to pay for hangar, you have to pay for pilots, you have to pay for insurance, you have to pay for all of that. So if you took your total fixed cost and spread it out across the amount of hours that you fly, you really need to fly about 150 to 200 hours per year for it to start to make sense to own your own aircraft.
This is actually the way that Andrew Wilkinson flies.
I've always been someone who hates traveling, and there's something just so magical about just rolling up and getting on a plane and going. And the way I thought about it was, you know what? I wouldn't do this trip otherwise. It's such a pain in the ass to go on a trip just to meet one person or something. But if it's someone interesting enough, I'll spend the, 15 grand or whatever to charter a plane to fly to San Francisco for the night. And I'll go have dinner with someone amazing. And I found that it really paid off.
Okay, so thinking about finances, at what point does it start to make financial sense to charter?
I took a very non-scientific survey of the readers of my newsletter. Essentially, everybody came back with a very similar answer. It's $2 million in net income and a $20 million net worth. At that point, you start chartering pretty often. So that's kind of the threshold. Now, some were $1 million and 10, some were $3 million and 30, but kind of the median mode mean was $2 million in net income. That's to you kind of in your pocket, and $20 million net worth. Now it's time to start chartering more regularly.
But I guess it's all mindset, really, because Josh Payne is worth about $60 million. And, well, listen to what he said.
The only thing that we can't have today, I say, is flying private.
You don't think that's enough to fly private?
It doesn't fit. No, I don't think so. I mean, look, you could do it once. You could do it once a year, but I don't know. That's just how. It just feels like Oh, you know what? I don't know. You probably didn't see this post. I created a new post and reposted your post about your poor kid habits, and my answer was that I still fly coach, unless it's international. I can barely see the value in flying first.
Leveling up from chartering, we have fractional ownership.
When I say fractional, I mean NetJets, FlexJet, AirShare, the big players that offer, you buy a sliver and you're getting a membership into a larger fleet pool of airplanes.
Okay.
It is less capital intensive up front. On a per hour basis, it's a little bit more than flying, but when you blend it all the way down, it usually comes out, relatively slightly more expensive to break even depending on how much you're flying. The thing about fractional is that you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to hire pilots. You don't have to do insurance. You don't have to rent a hangar. You don't have to figure out, if your pilots are going to go on vacation, how are you figuring out how to get somebody to backfill for them? You're really getting like 90% of the benefits of ownership. You're also getting some tax benefits, right? So you're buying a portion of the airplane, you're depreciating on your tax schedule, but you're not having to deal with a lot of the headache. The traditional wisdom says that, you fly fractional until you fly 150 hours a year, and then you move into whole aircraft ownership because your blended cost is lower. What we're seeing is that that's becoming less and less true over time, is that there's actually this move to fractional from people who own entire aircraft and who fly enough to own entire aircraft, but are tired of dealing with the pilots. They're just like, I just want to pay a monthly bill and it's over and I get my private flying in. And then it's more approachable than whole aircraft ownership when you're looking at kind of make model specific information. Like let's say you buy 1/8 of a Challenger 3500, right? You're not going to be spending the $30 million list price of buying a new one, but you get access to a new fleet and you're buying 1/8 of it, right? So you're only out a couple of $1 million up front. And then, your shared portion of the total expenses per month.
At this point, you'd think we'd get to full ownership, but we're not quite there yet. There's another option that Preston sees people take, and it's not something that he would recommend enthusiastically.
The other option is co-ownership, where I own it and 2 other friends also own the airplane. We split everything 33%, which also means that if we both want to fly on Thanksgiving, one of us can go and the other cannot.
Yeah,
Or
that sounds
the
like
plane's gonna come back and
a way
pick
to
us up.
start fighting with your friends a lot if you're doing it that way.
I tell people, if you're going to have an airplane partner, you need to be pickier about your airplane partner than your spouse.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that your interests are aligned and that everybody is, being copacetic and everybody is happy in the relationship. Or you have so much money that you just don't care.
If you are flying often enough and you have enough money to justify it, then owning a plane outright might be the best option for you. However, here the price range gets pretty big. So we're going to shift to that spectrum. Obviously, there are things that exist outside of the spectrum, but Preston has put together a pretty definitive beginning and end for the sake of this conversation. Before we get into the further pros and cons and costs of owning a plane, let's get that overview.
On the very, very bottom end, you have a single engine turboprop. The definition of a turboprop is it is a jet engine that turns a propeller. That's going to seat 6 people. There's multiple brands and there's multiple models in that category. Moving up in the single engine turboprop, you have what's called a PC-12, very popular aircraft for regional travel. It can haul a lot of stuff and is not very fast, but it's kind of they call it the turbine suburban. You can seat 8 people in the back comfortably. You can load it to the gills with ski gear or golf gear or whatever and kind of go wherever. It can land on grass. It's really versatile. You then have multi-engine turboprop, which is the King Air, is the most popular version. If you're familiar with Wheels Up, if you watch College Game Day, and you see them fly in the Pickers back in the day, they would fly King Airs. It's 2 turboprop engines. You can see 8 people in the middle, not very fast, but can go a relatively long way and is efficient from a cost perspective. When you get into the jet world, you have the very light jet, which is the bottom end. That's going to be your Vision jets, is in a class of its own, which is what Nick owns. And then you have multi-engine, very light jets. You have the Honda jet, you have the Citation M2, you have the Phenom 100. Those are going to be, short range. You're talking 1,000-ish nautical miles. You can get up to 41,000 feet, so you can get over some weather. It is truly a jet, but it's typically going to sit 4 to 6 people in the back, 2 people up front, but it's going to give you that true jet feel. It's kind of the first entry into like what you would consider jet. Purchase price on something like that, you're looking at your get-in price on a Beechcraft Premier 1A for about $1.5 million, and you're kind of going to top out in that range. Brand new delivery, fully optioned at around $5.5 million. And your effective hourly cost is going to be somewhere between $1,200 on the Vision jet to call it $2,500 an hour on kind of your traditional light jets, very light jets. Okay. Moving up, you have light jets, Phenom 300, things like that. Those are going to be have a little bit longer range. They're going to be a little bit spacier cabin. They're going to be comfortable, really popular in places like Texas, because from Texas, you can get all four corners of the US. You're not going to get Miami to LA, but you're going to be able to get relatively far. Moving up, you have the mid-size jet, which is Citation XLS, flying things like NetJets or VistaJet. You can charter them, you can buy them. Get-in price on those is going to be $3 million. You're going to top out around 10. From mid-size, you're going to get to super mid, which is very creative, right? It's like large and extra large, right? It's like an extra, extra large. Super mid is the first time that you're going to be able to get New York to LA. That is the first kind of cabin size. Get-in price, purchase-wise, $6 million. You're going to top out at like 22 for like a brand new 25, brand new delivery, super mid-sized jet. You can charter those. You can buy fractionals. There's lots of ways to fly them, but that's kind of if you're going to own one. Then you get into large cabin. That's going to be Challenger 650. When you start thinking private jet, like that is what you're thinking about. Your get-in price is like $5 million on the very, very low end, and you're moving up into like $50, $60 million. This is State Farm. This is Pepsi. This is Coca-Cola. This is like Kim Kardashian. Those types of people start moving into the large cabin jets. From large cabin, you have ultra long range. Ultra long range, your brand new get-in price for a G700 is $75 million. This is the big ballers. But like, notice we've talked about all of these other significantly, quote unquote, more affordable and approachable aircraft before we get to that. And when you look at a percentage of the market, the ultra long range jet is likely 5% to 10% of the market, but it gets 100% of the mind share and 100% of the media coverage.
Okay, that's a lot of information, and it means that there's a lot to think about. But budget and time in the air, that's only the first layer. Other things that you should be considering are where you live, your use case, safety. Do you get motion sickness? That matters a lot. We're going to cover all of those things, but let's start with the big item, which is, what is it actually like to own a plane? Aside from our guests agreeing that luxury flying is well worth the money, another common sentiment that I hear is that owning stuff actually kind of sucks, because the more you own, the more you have to be responsible for. And sometimes the effort of that responsibility isn't worth the value of the thing. Planes, as you may have already guessed, are a bit of a pain to own. And that's exactly why Scott Galloway told us he doesn't own one anymore.
My dad used to take me to Orange County Airport when I was a kid, before there was even security. It was like a restaurant on a runway. So I got very into aviation. I can still look up in the sky and tell you what kind of plane it is. And I've always had an obsession with aviation. I'm sure there's something crazy you've bought because you just always wanted that thing. For me, it was a plane. Did it for 3 years, realized what a hassle it is, hiring and firing pilots and healthcare and maintenance. And I just went fractional.
The pilot thing's big. Planes can't fly themselves. Here's how that works.
There's different licenses similar to truck drivers, right? You and I can't just jump in a truck and drive it. You're going to have to build up. There's what's called a commercial pilot's license, which is the licensure with the FAA that says that you are able to be paid to fly. That is what the commercial pilot's license. And then for jets specifically, you have to be type rated in that specific make model of aircraft. So you have to go through training, and that can be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month of intense training for pilots so that they know everything about that airplane and their systems, where every button is, things like that. So when you're hiring pilots, you want to make sure, like, if you can hire a pilot and them not be typed, but you're going to have to pay for them to go to type school, and that can be anywhere from $20,000 to $70,000.
And then do you see most people just have like ongoing relationships with pilots, or do you hire a couple? Or
it's a blend. So it's a blend of some hire their own pilots, and they will have what some people choose to do is they will have pilots on staff. So they, just like any other employee. So you have somebody who runs HR, you have somebody who runs finance, and you have someone who runs the airplane, right? So like literally an airplane manager. And then they will have pilots that work up underneath them in kind of a reporting structure. Others will do contract pilots. So they will just pay them a day rate for the day that they fly on the airplane. It depends on how much flying you're doing, will depend on which one makes more sense.
Of course, you could just fly it yourself. That's what Jess Ma did, and it's also what Brian Johnson did for a little bit, until the novelty wore off.
The only thing I did is I bought a jet. I learned how to fly an airplane in the preceding years I had a little prop plane that I had, a little small jet, so I bought a jet.
I mean, that's a great purchase. And do you still fly that?
I sold it during COVID.
I asked Preston about that, and it turns out that entrepreneurs flying their own planes is far more common than you'd expect, or exactly as common as you'd expect if you've met a lot of entrepreneurs. But interestingly, in Preston's experience, it is more prevalent in one specific niche.
There's a crossover of FinTech founders with flying their own planes, and I could not tell you what the direct correlation is, but it's there's a FinTech overlap. There's a lot of people. I think that it's it would be the same as asking how many entrepreneurs and founders drive motorcycles, because statistically driving motorcycles is incredibly dangerous. Mm-hmm. And if you asked how many of them drive motorcycles, right, it's probably pretty high, right? It is not the world's safest activity to fly yourself, but it's also not inherently incredibly dangerous. And there's constant evolution of training and safety that is making pilots safer and airplanes safer flying for yourself. My business is aviation finance, so we finance people's airplanes. And I find this direct correlation between your stereotypical driven founder who's really wanting to build and flying themselves privately, because it takes a lot of the same hard skills, right? Attention to detail, insane amount of focus, ability to take complex situations and distill them down into simple principles, remembering checklists, being incredibly retentive about every little thing about the airplane and operating the airplane that oftentimes correlates to how they act in business.
The motorcycle thing actually made me laugh a little bit when he said that, because there have been multiple instances when I've had to get Sam back on topic in an interview because him and his guest have gone off just talking about motorcycles, way off topic. So that's kind of funny. Those conversations can be really interesting and super valuable. They don't always have to be about the finances or the business. And I think you see where I'm going with this. JoinHampton.com. Hampton is the reason that this podcast exists, not only because they make it and we talk about it, but because they want to reach other founders who need this kind of community. And the community is full of entrepreneurs, people who have those similar mindsets, people who might be inclined to fly a plane while all your other friends on your soccer team or whatever are saying, "What are you talking about? That's dumb and you're reckless." It's important to have a community of founders who you can talk to and relate to. And we talk about Hampton not only because they make this podcast, and obviously that's why we're here. It's because they want to reach you. They want to reach founders who need this kind of community because it's built by founders who have benefited from it and created it because they wanted it. And the cool thing is that it's not just connecting people online, via whatever, chats, which there is an element of that, but a lot of it is in person too. So you can actually meet up with these people at houses, at resorts, at different events, in person, seeing people in the flesh, maybe taking plane lessons together. I don't know. But this kind of stuff is all happening at Hampton. So if you are a founder doing at least $3 million ARR, you should definitely check it out because it's a super valuable resource for not just the community aspect and the social aspect, but also because you can get advice for things that are relevant to your business or your personal finances. All of that stuff from people who are in similar situations in person. So that's joinhampton.com. And also, every person who signs up, you're guaranteeing that this podcast continues to be made for the people who maybe aren't ready to join, but are really finding it valuable and will be there eventually. So joinhampton.com. But anyway, back to the show. No matter if you fly your own plane or if you have pilots, there's going to be different costs associated with each. Something that you will have to always consider is insurance.
It's between $30,000 and $50,000 per year. And it really depends on how big of an airplane you have. And it can go up from there and it can go not very far down from there.
Okay. And then what about other hidden costs that people might not be expecting?
So your hangar rent is something to be aware of. If you're in a major metropolitan area, if you can get hangar space in the first place, you can be spending anywhere from $2,000 a month to $20,000 a month. And depending on the size of airplane, depends on, where you're keeping it. If you're in Teterboro and you fly a big airplane, you're spending a ton of money per month. That's another hidden cost. If you fly into a place where there is de-icing that's required, so if you fly in and it's really cold, you have to get sprayed with the stuff, right? business jets have to be sprayed with this stuff too. I mean, that could be a $10,000 bill that you weren't expecting, just because you flew into like a cold area.
Toronto.
Toronto.
Yeah.
Anywhere above the Mason-Dixon, basically, and even in Atlanta 3 times a year, right? So you want to, you want to be aware of that. Depreciation, like real depreciation, something that a lot of people don't think about. This is a depreciating asset. I talk to so many people that are real estate and they're like, oh yeah, like it's great. Like I'm going to underwrite as though it's going up. The price of your airplane, barring during COVID and no other time in history, did your airplane value go up over time as opposed to down over time? So if you buy something for $1 million and you sell it 5 years later for $500,000, there is like $100,000 worth of cost in there. Yes, there is the tax depreciation, which is a tax haven. It's a tax strategy. There is also the real cost of the degradation in value that you have to consider when you're buying something, which is why when you're buying something, you want to make sure you buy it at the right price so that your residual value is held as strongly as possible compared to like if you overpay, right, you're gonna get hit with that when you go to sell the airplane.
Here's a PSA from Preston on that depreciating asset note. Even if you can write it off as a business expense and you get some good tax benefits or whatever, no matter what any online grifter tells you, a plane will always be a loss.
You cannot house hack a jet and fly for free. You cannot buy the airplane and then fly it for free because you can charter it so many times. There's a couple of people on Instagram that try and tell you that you can, but I will tell you this. The minute that you have a $500,000 repair bill, all of a sudden, a lot of your free flying just got eaten up because you've flown the airplane 700 hours a year and they're really not designed to fly that much. So you cannot offset your entire cost of ownership and your entire cost of flying with chartering your aircraft. It's mathematically impossible. Now that we've established that that is the case, you can offset some of your fixed costs with a certain amount of chartering, but you're never going to make money owning an airplane. Over the long run, you will lose money. And anybody who's out there who's telling you that you can make money doesn't know how to do math.
I feel like I spent the last 5 minutes convincing you not to own a plane, but there are a ton of people who do own planes and they love it. And here's who they are according to Preston.
So one persona is, and this is a much bigger persona than a lot of people understand, is the person who lives in a rural tertiary city. So I'll give you an example. I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga, Tennessee has terrible airline service. People say, oh, why don't you just fly the airline? Well, because I have to connect through Atlanta if I want to go anywhere. So I add 4 hours to every trip. So tertiary cities, people who work in manufacturing, because manufacturing tends to happen in tertiary cities for the purpose that labor is cheap. And the nature of manufacturing is that there is a just-in-time component. And every time there's a shutdown, you really need that plant back up and running. So if you're Volkswagen and your plant goes down, it's costing you $5 million per hour, right? Like, so the cost is, whatever the cost is of the private jet to move your engineers to get there is like so low compared to the cost of like downtime. Okay. So that's a big one. Regional franchise owners is a big one. So people with physical brick and mortar locations. It's not as big with e-commerce. Like if you're an internet person, if you're an internet business, like you don't really have a use to go somewhere for business, and you can have a really good business, but you should just probably fly business class because you probably live in New York City and you can get wherever you want to, direct. So why would you bother with, private aviation? Big in real estate, because real estate has a physical component. I would say, like, if you own a business, if there's a physical component to your business, private aviation probably would accelerate it. Or the other archetype is post-monetary founders who say, look, I made my money, I want to now enjoy it, and I'm going to spend it on flying private. I know a lot of founders that are that way, that they're like, look, this makes absolutely no sense for my business or whatever I'm doing now, but I worked really hard, and so therefore I'm going to enjoy it.
We started this episode by referencing Nick Huber, and he is a super frugal and analytical guy. However, he justifies co-owning a jet. He actually fits into a couple of the personas that Preston just mentioned.
I'm an hour and 45 minutes in traffic from the Atlanta airport. And then it's an hour to get through security and get to my gate in the largest airport in the world. Mm-hmm. And I have business in rural towns all over America with my storage facility. My family's in a rural town in southern Indiana. My wife's family's in a rural town in upstate New York. I did the math of, hey, I can buy 1/4 share of a jet that can fly my family around for, and look, I say jet, it's a Vision jet. It's smaller than most turboprops. It's more affordable than most turboprops. Share of this airplane for $900,000. And it's only $1,000 an hour to fly the airplane. So I can get round trip to Indiana, to Bristol, Virginia, where one of my properties is, and I'm going to get a $3,000 or $4,000 bill.
The other benefit is time. Time is the single most valuable thing you can buy, according to a lot of our guests. How you determine the value of your time is up to you. But travel time is an easy target. And if you own your own jet, you can save a lot of it.
We spent a day, we went from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Bentonville, Arkansas. I dropped my daughter off at preschool, went to the airport, spent 8 hours in Bentonville, Arkansas, and was back home to give her a bath that evening, same evening. So I dropped her off at school and I gave her a bath, and I spent 8 hours in a city a full state away that was like, would have been, to get there commercially, would have been an 8-hour ordeal the night before, spend the night in a hotel, do the 8 hours, and maybe get back by 1 a.m. or the next morning if I was lucky. So it took a 3-day travel experience between kid drop off and kid bath time. And that part is what you cannot quantify.
The time thing actually comes up a lot in the show, and it's something that I want to push back on a little bit. Patience is a very valuable skill, but it's also a skill that I think needs to be continuously practiced. There's this really interesting juxtaposition that I've noticed in founders in the past year and a half working on the show. And it's that there's this action-oriented mindset and this like eagerness that propels them forward. That's a plain pun for you. But at the same time, the patience through the slow build, the downturns, the rough times, that's what ultimately leads to the payoff. It's the people who can wait it out through that period. Patience is a really valuable skill. And I think that being cognizant of the necessity of continuously practicing that skill is something that you really have to think about before you get caught up in the possibilities of being able to buy back your time. And I mentioned the payoff of an exit or business success, but I actually don't think that the skill is only valuable with the promise of a reward. In fact, I think it's just an incredibly important part of being a good person overall. That's not to say that you need to fly economy or wait in long lines to be a good person, but it is something to think about perhaps the next time you fly economy or wait in long lines. On a completely different note, if you are considering buying a plane and you get motion sickness, it might be a go big or go home situation.
So let's say a Cirrus SR22 is like every entrepreneur that dreams of flying themselves tends to want to fly the Cirrus SR22 at some point in their flying career. It has a parachute. They just came out with an auto land button. So in the event that the pilot becomes incapacitated, you push a button and it'll land for you safely on the nearest runway. They are so much more subject to turbulence than big aircraft are. And that is a function of weight versus turbulence, right? So the lighter weight your aircraft is, the more, generally speaking, there's some other aerodynamic features that will play into this, but generally speaking, weight has a direct correlation, inverse correlation to turbulence. So if you're in a small airplane and the wind blows, right, it's like, it would be like, hey, I'm going to use this piece of paper and this piece of cardboard and then this cinder block, right? Like, which one's going to be affected by the wind more, right? The piece of paper, not the piece, less than the piece of cardboard, but the piece of cardboard is still going to blow and the cinder block's not, right? Unless it's really windy, and then it's really going to pick that cinder block up. So it's like, it's a similar kind of scenario with airplanes.
As someone who gets motion sickness, I can confirm that it sucks. I did a city plane tour one time, and just like one of those little small planes, and I hated every second of it. But it doesn't matter because I can't afford a jet, big or small. But someone who can afford the big jets is one of our past guests, Oscar. And he can afford it because he's a billionaire. He broke down what it costs him.
We got a family jet. It's pretty expensive.
Can you share the cost of that?
Is $49 million. So it's a pretty good chunk of change for it. I let my kids use it all the time, and we use it all the time. But we got a big family, so I got a big plane. And if you got a company, so it makes enough money, you can write it off and depreciate it. It's great, but I'm private. I can't depreciate it and I can't write it off. So it's just a dead expense.
It's just straight out of the bank account.
Just bank. It's just like having a cow or a horse.
Wait, so $49 million? Do you write a check for that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, you just sell a little bit of stock and you write a check for it.
And then $15,000 an hour. Are there other expenses associated with the jet?
Well, that's about what it costs because you got to pay for pilots and you got to pay to put it in a hangar. You got to pay insurance and you got to pay smart parts, which is so much an hour for smart parts in case something breaks. And then fuel and I think the most expensive thing is the fuel and the pilots because you got to pay pilots a lot of money. You got to have 2 of them.
How many people can be on it at one time?
We can carry 13. Not counting the pilots.
And how far can you go with it?
We can go from here to England, to London, from the middle of the United States to London.
Yeah.
And about 10-hour flight.
Okay.
And still have plenty of fuel.
Yeah, that's the other thing about planes. Size correlates to distance. And we haven't talked about that too much because, it's pretty obvious. But going back to the other end of the spectrum, Nick Huber's plane, that would have a much harder time getting to London from the middle of the United States.
The plane can get to Europe with a pilot in it, and that's it, right? Because there are Vision jets that exist in Europe. There's a wholesale center in London for Cirrus Vision jets. They have to go up and around through Iceland. You'd probably have to stop. If you left Athens, Georgia to get to London, you're stopping 5 times for fuel is my guess. You're probably getting to New York City. You're going to stop another time when you get further north of there. You're going to stop in either Greenland or Iceland and then maybe make the jump from there. It just depends on winds and things like that. But you're not going to do at that point, just go Delta One. It's just better.
Yeah. You're describing the colonial path to America.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo. Yeah.
There's really no argument that flying private can't save you time. It's more comfortable. It's more convenient. If you're a public figure, it might actually be your only option. So it does make sense in a lot of situations. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the environmental toll of flying. And I won't hammer the point in too hard, but just remember that when you're doing cost-benefit analysis, it's not just about you, it's about everyone. But anyway, after everything we said, if you still are considering buying, you're probably going to buy used.
There are 2 types of buyers, what I have found. There are new buyers and there are used buyers. It's kind of like cars. I am a used car buyer just because of the fact that I want somebody else to eat the massive amount of depreciation that happens in the first year. There are other people that want to buy the new car because they want the new car smell and they like to be able to customize exactly what they want and they like to order it off the lot. So there's really 2 types of buyers. It's not necessarily always one or the other, right? You have massive Fortune 50 companies that buy used. You have other Fortune 50s that have specific rules in their operating agreement that says we cannot buy used airplanes. We have to be the first owner, right? Mark Zuckerberg buys brand new airplanes. It just is what it is, right? But Elon Musk, his 650 was used when he bought it, right? So it doesn't necessarily there is not a category of here's the financial sense when it makes sense to buy used and here's when it makes sense to buy new. But most aircraft transactions that happen in a given year are used aircraft transactions.
Regardless of if you own or co-own or fractional own or charter or have a jet or whatever type of plane you have, there's a lot of money in this space. And that means that there are a lot of opportunities to be taken advantage of. And that's something that Preston says you need to look out for.
There are a lot of scammers that are out there. And if you are ignorant, and I guarantee you that you are in some way, shape, or form, you're ignorant about something, there are people that are out there that will take advantage of you. Be on the lookout. The dollars are big. So therefore, there's a lot of people that come out of the woodwork that are not exactly A+ characters. So be on the lookout. Don't get ripped off.
At the beginning of this episode, you heard Andrew Wilkinson say that flying private is one of the only rich people things that is worth the money. However, there are other things. And if you want to hear what they are, and also the things that haven't been worth it, click here.